The air in the Greater Hope Cathedral didn't just turn cold, it vanished. 1 second, the scent of expensive lilies and vanilla candles filled the lungs of 300 guests. The next, there was only the sharp, echoing crack of skin hitting skin, a sound so violent it seemed to shatter the stained glass overhead. Ellen Ripley Toretto felt her head whip to the side, her lace veil snagging on a diamond earring as she stumbled. The world blurred into a smear of white silk and mahogany pews. Her cheek didn't just sting, it throbbed with the rhythm of her own panicked heart. She looked up, her vision swimming at the man she had loved for 3 years. He stood there, chest heaving, his hands still raised, his face twisted into a mask of redirected rage she didn't recognize. The silence was a physical weight. No one moved. No one breathed. The betrayal was so public, so absolute, that it felt like Ellen was drowning in the middle of the aisle. Hello everyone. It is so good to have you here with us today. Before we go any further into this harrowing journey of shadows and redemption, I want to take a moment to welcome you. Whether you're a longtime member of our community or this is your first time stumbling upon our stories, we are honored to have you. Where are you watching from today? Please let us know in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep these stories alive, and we'd love for you to be part of our growing family. Are you doing okay today? Take a deep breath. We're in this together. Now back to that frozen moment in the cathedral. Ellen's knees hit the marble floor. The humiliation was a cold tide. She could feel the judgmental whispers beginning to stir in the back pews, the cameras of socialites already recording her downfall. Her wedding day had become her funeral. But then the heavy oak doors at the rear of the church didn't just open, they were thrown wide. A man walked in. To the outside world, Ellen Ripley Toretto was the definition of unbreakable. Growing up in the fractured remains of the city's industrial district, she had learned early that silence was a shield and hard work was a ladder. She was a woman of soft edges and steel bones, a gifted architect who dreamt of building structures that could withstand any storm, perhaps because her own life had felt like a series of seismic shifts. Her deepest desire wasn't wealth or fame, it was permanence. She craved a foundation that wouldn't crack, a home where the floor didn't fall out from under her. But beneath that professional exterior lay a paralyzing fear, the fear of being truly seen and found wanting. She had spent years molding herself into the perfect partner for her ex-fiancé, a rising political star who valued her more as a trophy than a soul. She had silenced her own vibrant opinions to echo his, tucked away her heritage to fit into his sterile world, all for the promise of a stability that turned out to be a mirage. The slap at the altar hadn't just bruised her face, it had shattered the carefully constructed identity she had built to survive. As she stood in the marble foyer of Dominic's sprawling estate, a fortress of glass and obsidian perched above the city, Ellen felt smaller than she ever had. She was still in her torn wedding dress, the lace hem stained with the dust of the cathedral floor. "You're shaking," a voice drifted from the shadows of the grand staircase. Ellen turned to see Clarice Starling Vaughan, Dominic's sister and the only person rumored to have a leash on his darker impulses. Clarice didn't move like the socialites Ellen knew. She moved like a soldier, her eyes sharp and analytical. She approached Ellen not with a hug, but with a glass of amber liquid and a silk robe. "He does that to people," Clarice said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Dominic doesn't just enter a room, he colonizes it. But you're the first person I've seen look him in the eye without flinching. Even when you were on your knees, your eyes were defiant. That's why he's kept tabs on you for 3 years." Dominic finally turned, his dark eyes flashing with a terrifying, possessive heat. "She won't. I will make her world so safe, so beautiful, and so terrifyingly dependent on me that the very thought of the outside world will make her scream. She thinks I saved her from a humiliation. She has no idea I've just invited her into the heart of the fire." The stakes were now visible, hidden behind the gilded walls of the estate. Ellen was no longer a bride. She was a bird in a cage made of the finest gold, guarded by a man who would burn the world down just to keep her from flying away. The first 48 hours of Ellen's new life felt like a fever dream curated by a billionaire. She had been moved from the guest wing to the master suite, a cavernous room of charcoal velvet and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over a city that now felt a million miles away. There were no locks on the doors, yet Ellen had never felt more imprisoned. She stood before a vanity mirror, staring at the woman reflected back. Gone was the torn wedding lace. In its place was a slip of emerald silk that cost more than her college tuition. But it was the jewelry that felt like a weight. Around her neck sat a collar of diamonds, heavy and cold. It wasn't just a gift, it felt like a mark of ownership. The heavy doors groaned open and Dominic stepped in. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the throat, revealing the faint edge of a tattoo, the wings of a phoenix rising from his collarbone. He looked less like a businessman now and more like the warlord the tabloids whispered about. "You haven't eaten," he noted, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register that made Ellen's skin prickle. He moved toward her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. He placed his large, calloused hands on her shoulders. The contrast was startling, his tanned, scarred skin against her deep, smooth complexion. "I'm not hungry, Dominic," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to go home. I need to get my things from the apartment. I have a job, I have a life." "You had a life, Ellen," he interrupted, his grip tightening just enough to be felt but not enough to hurt. "The moment that man laid a hand on you, that life ended. Do you think you can walk back into your architectural firm? Do you think the board of directors wants the humiliated bride representing them? They've already scrubbed your name from the directory." The air left Ellen's lungs. "How do you know that?" "Because I bought the firm this morning," he said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "You don't work for them anymore. You work for me. You are the lead architect of the Corleone Foundation. You will build my legacy, and in return I will give you a world where no one can ever touch you again." The shock was a physical blow. He hadn't just saved her, he had dismantled her escape routes. Before she could find the words to scream, the silence of the mansion was shattered. A muffled explosion rocked the foundations of the house. The glass in the master suite rattled violently. Within seconds, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy gunfire erupted from the courtyard below. "Stay down," Dominic roared, his entire demeanor shifting in a heartbeat. The polished gentleman vanished, replaced by a predator. He reached into the small of his back and pulled a matte black handgun, his movements fluid and practiced. He shoved Ellen into the walk-in closet, a room the size of a standard apartment, and slammed the heavy, reinforced door. "Do not open this for anyone but me or Clarice. Do you understand?" "Dominic, what is happening?" she cried, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The past is catching up," he said, his eyes flashing with a dark, primal light. "And I'm about to bury it." Through the thin gap in the door, Ellen watched as the man she had just married stepped into the hallway. But he wasn't alone. From the shadows of the corridor emerged a man she recognized from the news. Anton Sugar-Soprano, a rival syndicate leader known for a level of cruelty that even the underworld feared. But the twist wasn't the attack itself. It was what Anton shouted through the chaos. "You think you can keep her, Dominic? You think she won't find out you were the one who paid her fiancé to hit her? You think she won't find out you staged the whole rescue?" The world stopped spinning for Ellen. The gunfire continued, the screams of men echoed in the halls, but all she could hear was the ringing in her ears. She looked at the door, at the silhouette of the man who claimed to be her savior. Had he orchestrated her public execution just to play the hero? Was her entire rescue a script written in blood by the man now standing between her and a bullet? The betrayal she felt at the church was nothing compared to this. If Anton was telling the truth, she wasn't just married to a dangerous man, she was married to the architect of her own ruin. As the sounds of combat grew closer, Ellen realized she wasn't just a bride or a trophy. She was the prize in a war where truth was the first casualty. She looked around the darkened closet, her eyes landing on a heavy bronze award on a shelf. If Dominic came back through that door, she didn't know if she would hug him or kill him. The chaos of the assault lasted 40 minutes, but for Ellen, trapped in the suffocating luxury of the walk-in closet, it felt like a lifetime spent in a tomb. When the door finally creaked open, it wasn't the monster Anton who stood there but Dominic. He was splattered with blood, not his own, and his breathing was heavy, ragged. He reached for her, but Ellen recoiled, her back hitting the rows of designer dresses like they were thorns. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Did you pay him to break me?" Dominic's face went unnervingly still. He didn't offer a quick lie or a frantic denial. He simply stepped into the closet, closing the door behind him to muffle the sounds of his men dragging bodies across the marble outside. Anton is a man who deals in poison, Ellen. He knows that the only way to kill a man like me is to rot the thing he loves from the inside out. That's not a denial, she spat, her eyes burning with tears of fury. It's the only truth you get tonight, he replied, his voice a low, vibrating hum. Now get up. The city isn't safe for you. We're moving to the estate in the north. The estate in the north was a fortress carved into the side of a jagged cliff, overlooking a churning gray Atlantic. If the city mansion was a gilded cage, this was a mountain prison. For the next 2 weeks, Ellen lived in a state of hypervigilance. She was surrounded by beauty, cashmere throws, gourmet meals delivered by silent staff, and a library that contained every architectural journal ever printed. But she felt the phantom sting of that altar slap every time Dominic entered a room. The tension between them was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Dominic didn't force himself on her. In fact, he treated her with a formal, almost reverent distance that was more unsettling than aggression. He was courting her, but it was the courtship of a spider and a fly. "You're building a wall," Dominic said one evening. He had found her in the library, sketching feverishly on a blueprint of a cathedral, one with no doors. He stood by the fireplace, the orange glow casting long, demonic shadows across his sharp features. "I'm an architect, Dominic." "It's what I do," Ellen replied without looking up. "Walls keep things out. Or keep things in. I want you to design the new Corleone Cultural Center," he said, ignoring her barb. He walked over and placed a set of keys on her table. Not keys to a car, but to the archives of his family's history. "I want the world to see what we are. Not what they whisper we are. Show them the strength I see in you." "Why me?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze. "You could hire anyone. You could buy a Pritzker Prize winner." Dominic leaned over the table, his face inches from hers. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of the charcoal she was using. "Because you understand how to make something beautiful out of stone and shadow. Because you are the only person who doesn't look at me and see a bank account or a bullet. You look at me and see a man. Even if that man is a devil." Over the following days, the psychological warfare shifted. Dominic began to share pieces of himself, not through words but through actions. He showed her the charities the Corleone Foundation funded, orphanages for children of the streets, hospitals that didn't ask for insurance. He was a man of horrific violence, yes, but he was also a man of fierce, localized justice. Ellen found herself caught in a terrifying tug-of-war. She would spend her mornings investigating the altar setup theory, searching for any scrap of evidence that Dominic had manipulated her tragedy. She spoke to Clarice Starling Vaughan, trying to trip her up. "Did he do it, Clarice? Did he pay that coward to hit me?" Clarice looked at her with a mixture of pity and respect. "My brother is a lot of things, Ellen. He's a thief, a leader, and a killer. But he's also a man who has been obsessed with you since you stood up to the Maroney family 3 years ago to save that park in the 4th Ward. He doesn't need to break a woman to win her. He waits for the world to break her, and then he ensures he's the only one there to pick up the pieces. Is that manipulation? Maybe. But is it a lie? No." The tension reached a breaking point during a stormy night when the power flickered and died. Ellen was in the kitchen, a knife in her hand as she cut an apple, her nerves frayed. When a hand touched her waist, she spun, the blade grazing Dominic's forearm. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the blood blooming on his white sleeve. He just looked at her. "Do it," he whispered. "If you think I'm the monster who ruined your life, finish it. I won't stop you." Ellen's hand shook. The tip of the knife pressed against his chest, right over his heart. She saw the raw, terrifying vulnerability in his eyes. A man who was literally offering his life to her just to prove a point. In that moment, the attraction she had been fighting, the dark magnetic pull of his power and his strange, warped devotion, surfaced. She didn't stab him. She dropped the knife. It clattered on the tile, a silver scream in the dark. Dominic moved then, pulling her into him with a desperation that broke her heart. He kissed her, not with the gentleness of a savior, but with the hunger of a man who had been starving in the dark for 3 years. It was a kiss that tasted of salt, rain, and unspoken secrets. But as she melted into him, a thought chilled her blood. Was this real growth, or was she just succumbing to Stockholm Syndrome? And more importantly, if Dominic was innocent of the slap, Who was the man who had truly sent Anton to the mansion? The mystery was deepening and the red herrings were starting to pile up. Ellen realized that she was starting to love a man she still didn't fully trust, a realization more dangerous than any bullet. The kiss was a bridge over an abyss, and for a few hours, Ellen allowed herself to believe she had crossed it. But the morning light in the North Estate was unforgiving, gray and cold as it filtered through the high windows. The intimacy of the night before felt like a beautiful lie, a temporary truce in a war that was only just beginning to reveal its true front lines. As Dominic slept, his face finally peaceful, the harsh lines of the Mafia dawn softened by the pillow, Ellen slipped out of bed. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She didn't head for the door, she headed for the study. She needed more than Clarice's cryptic riddles. She needed proof. The study was locked, but Ellen was an architect. She knew that every fortress had a flaw. She used a slim drafting tool she'd secreted from her kit to bypass the old-fashioned tumbler. The room smelled of old paper and the lingering ghost of Dominic's tobacco. She went straight for the floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets hidden behind a sliding mahogany panel. Her fingers danced over labels. Logistics, acquisitions, territory. Then she found it. A folder marked with the date of her failed wedding. Inside wasn't a receipt for a hitman or a payoff to her ex-fiancé. Instead, she found a series of surveillance photographs. They weren't of her. They were of her ex-fiancé, Hannibal Lecter Morales, meeting in a dark parking garage with a man whose face was obscured by a hood. In the photos, money was being exchanged. But the date on the photos was from 6 months ago. "You were looking for a confession," a voice rasped from the doorway. Ellen jumped, the folder spilling its contents across the rug. Dominic stood there, wrapped in a black silk robe, his eyes tired but sharp. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. "I told you I didn't pay him to hit you, Ellen," Dominic said, walking slowly into the room. He picked up one of the photos. "I didn't have to." Hannibal was already deep in debt to the Maroney syndicate. They owned him. They told him that if he married you, the woman who had blocked their development project in the Fourth Ward, they would wipe his debt. But when I started showing interest in you, they changed the plan. Ellen's head spun. Changed the plan? How? "They realized I loved you," Dominic said, the word love hitting the air like a heavy stone. "They knew that if they disgraced you publicly, I would be forced to step in to save my own reputation, or simply because I couldn't stand to see you broken. The slap wasn't for you, Ellen. It was a lure for me. So you did play into their hands?" Ellen whispered. "No," Dominic growled, stepping closer until he was looming over her. "I took the lure and I bit the hand that held it. I married you to take you off their board entirely. As a Corleone, you are untouchable by their laws. But there's something you haven't seen yet. Look at the last photo in the stack." Ellen reached down with trembling fingers. The last photo was a clear shot of the man in the hood. He had finally looked up at the camera. The blood drained from Ellen's face. The man wasn't a Maroney soldier. It was Vincent Vega Costello, Dominic's own right-hand man. "Vincent." Ellen gasped. "But he's your brother-in-arms. He's been with you since the beginning." "Exactly," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "The revelation isn't that I saved you, Ellen. The revelation is that the coup is coming from inside my own house. Vincent didn't just help Hannibal. He's the one who leaked our location to Anton Sugar Soprano. He's been working to dismantle me from the inside, using you as the ultimate distraction." The stakes didn't just rise, the entire world inverted. The man Ellen had begun to trust was being betrayed by the man who guarded their door. And more chillingly, Dominic revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "Vincent doesn't want my money, Ellen. He wants the one thing I've spent 3 years trying to keep out of the mud. He wants you. He thinks that if I fall, he can step into my shoes, my throne, and my bed." The gilded cage was no longer a metaphor. They were trapped in a fortress with a traitor who held the keys. The romantic connection they had forged the night before was now the only thing keeping them alive, but it was also the very target Vincent was aiming for. Suddenly, the intercom on the desk buzzed. It was Vincent's voice, calm and professional. "Boss, the Maroney representatives are at the gate. They say they have a peace offering. Should I let them in?" Dominic looked at Ellen. The shared vulnerability of the moment was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man facing his end. He reached into the drawer and handed Ellen a small silver-plated derringer. The game has changed, Dominic said. They aren't here for peace. And Vincent isn't asking for permission. He's telling us they're already here. The midpoint twist was complete. Ellen wasn't just a victim or a bride. She was now the only person Dominic could truly trust in a house full of vipers. The man she feared was the only thing standing between her and a fate far worse than a slap at the altar. The descent into the bowels of the estate was a journey through a nightmare. The air was damp, smelling of salt and old stone. Behind them, the muffled sounds of the peace offering turned into a symphony of violence. Screams echoed through the vents. Men Ellen had seen serving tea or patrolling the grounds were being systematically erased. They emerged halfway down the cliffside on a narrow, rain-slicked ledge. The Atlantic churned hundreds of feet below, a frothing graveyard of jagged rocks. The storm had returned with a vengeance, the wind whipping Ellen's hair across her face like a lash. "We can't go down," Ellen yelled over the gale. "There's no path." "There's a boat," Dominic said, pointing toward a small cove obscured by the mist. "But we have to reach it before the tide turns." Before they could take a single step, a searchlight cut through the darkness, pinning them against the gray stone like insects on a board. From the ledge above, a silhouette appeared. It was Vincent Vega Costello. He wasn't carrying a rifle, he was holding a remote detonator. "Dominic." Vincent's voice echoed off the cliffs, amplified by the natural bowl of the cove. "You always were a romantic. It's your greatest flaw. You thought you could hide her in the one place I helped you build." Dominic stepped in front of Ellen, shielding her with his body. "You've burned 20 years of brotherhood for a throne that will be ash by morning, Vincent. The other families won't follow a traitor." "They won't follow a dead man either," Vincent retorted. He looked down at Ellen, his expression twisting into something sickly and covetous. "Ellen, come up. I'll tell the Maronis you were a captive. I'll give you the life he promised you but without the blood on your hands. I'll make you the queen of this city." Ellen looked at Dominic. He was wounded, exhausted, and outgunned. Then she looked at Vincent, the man who had orchestrated her humiliation, who had manipulated her heartbreak just to create a vacancy in Dominic's heart. "I'd rather jump," Ellen screamed into the wind. Vincent's face hardened. "Have it your way." He pressed the button. A series of explosions ripped through the cliffside above the tunnel exit. The mountain groaned. A massive slide of shale and boulders cascaded down, intended to sweep them into the sea. Dominic tackled Ellen, shoving her into a shallow indentation in the rock face as the world turned into a roar of falling stone and dust. When the dust cleared, the ledge was gone. Ellen gasped for air, her lungs burning. She was hanging onto a rusted iron rebar pipe, her feet dangling over the abyss. Above her, Dominic was pinned under a heavy slab of granite, his legs crushed, his face pale and slick with blood. He was slipping. "Dominic. Hold on," she cried, reaching out, but she was too far below him. "Ellen." His voice was a broken wheeze. "You have to let go. There's a secondary ledge, 10 feet down. If you jump now, you might hit the water far enough out. You can swim to the cove." "I am not leaving you," she screamed, the rain washing away her tears. "Listen to me," he roared, a flash of his old power returning. "Vincent is coming down. If he finds us both, he wins. If you go, you can reach the boat. There's a radio. Call Clarice. Tell her, the Phoenix is grounded. She'll know what to do." He looked at her then, and for the first time, there was no obsession, no control, no gilded cage in his eyes. There was only a devastating, selfless love. He reached out and unlatched the heavy diamond collar from her neck, the mark of his ownership, and let it fall into the ocean. "You were never mine to keep, Ellen," he whispered. "I just wanted to be the one who finally deserved you." With a final agonizing grunt of effort, Dominic shoved a piece of the rock, causing a shift that sent him sliding further toward the edge, but creating a momentary foothold for Ellen to scramble toward the lower path. "Go." As Ellen plummeted toward the dark water, the last thing she saw was the light of Vincent's flashlights cresting the ridge and the sight of Dominic, the most powerful man she had ever known, lying broken and alone in the rain. She hit the water like it was concrete. Darkness swallowed her. The cold was an absolute crushing weight, dragging her down into the silence of the deep. This was the darkest hour. Her savior was dying, her enemy was triumphant, and she was drowning in the very freedom she had once prayed for. The cold wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a thief, stealing the air from Ellen's lungs and the hope from her heart. As she sank into the blackness of the Atlantic, the weight of her heavy silk gown, once a symbol of a wedding, then a coronation, and finally a shroud, threatened to pull her into the permanent silence of the seabed. But as the pressure mounted, something snapped inside Ellen Ripley Toretto. She remembered the way Dominic had looked at her when he unlatched that diamond collar. He hadn't looked like a king losing a subject. He had looked like a man who believed she was worth dying for. For years, Ellen had been a woman who let life happen to her. She was the bride who was slapped, the architect who was silenced, the victim who was rescued. No more. Ellen's eyes snapped open in the salt water. With a burst of primal adrenaline, she clawed at the buttons of her dress, kicking free of the sodden silk. Stripped down to her slip, she fought her way toward the surface, her lungs screaming for oxygen. When she finally broke the water, she didn't scream. She took one deep, ragged breath and looked up. High above, the orange glow of fires at the estate silhouetted the treacherous cliffs. She could see the flickers of flashlights, Vincent's men hunting for her. She swam. Every stroke was a vow. She didn't head for the open sea, she headed for the cove Dominic had pointed out. Her muscles burned with a fire that defied the freezing water. She found the boat, a sleek, matte black interceptor tucked under a natural stone arch. She scrambled aboard, her skin blue and shaking. She didn't look for a blanket. She looked for the radio. "This is Ellen," she rasped into the receiver, her voice a ghost of itself. "Is anyone there? Please, if you can hear me. The Phoenix is grounded. I repeat, the Phoenix is grounded." There was a long moment of static. Then a voice cut through, not Clarice's but Vincent's. "Ellen, you really are a survivor," Vincent's voice crackled, oily and triumphant. "But you're too late. I'm standing over him right now. He's barely breathing, but I'm keeping him alive just long enough to watch me sink that boat with you on it. You have 30 seconds to come back to the dock or I finish him." Ellen looked at the dashboard of the boat. Beside the radio was a small, locked compartment marked with the Corleone crest. She remembered the keys Dominic had given her in the library, the keys to the archives. She hadn't left them in her room. She had tucked them into the hidden pocket of her slip before the explosion. She jammed the key into the lock. It didn't contain papers. It contained a remote override for the estate's security system and a heavy, high-grade flare gun. "I'm not coming back for you, Vincent," Ellen said, her voice turning to ice. "I'm coming back for him." She realized then that Dominic hadn't just given her a gilded cage. He had given her the blueprints. He had shown her the charities, the hospitals, the loyalists. He had given her the keys to his empire because he knew that if he ever fell, she was the only one strong enough to lead it. She tapped a sequence into the security override. Suddenly, the lights of the estate, the ones Vincent thought he controlled, began to strobe in a rhythmic, blinding pattern. It was a distress signal that only the Corleone loyalists scattered across the coast would recognize. From the dark horizon, other lights began to appear. Small fast boats. Helicopters with their transponders off. The Phoenix wasn't just a nickname for Dominic. It was the name of his private contingency force. "Clarice," Ellen whispered as a new frequency hummed to life. "We see you, Ellen," Clarice's voice came through, sharp and deadly. "We were waiting for the signal. We didn't think he'd trust anyone enough to send it. Hold tight. We're coming in hot." Ellen didn't wait. She slammed the boat into gear, the twin engines roaring to life with a sound like a thunderclap. She didn't head for safety. She turned the prow toward the dock where Vincent stood. She wasn't the architect of buildings anymore. She was the architect of a counterstrike. In that moment, the romantic tension that had simmered between her and Dominic shifted from a game of power to a bond of blood. She wasn't saving a mafia boss. She was saving her husband. She saw the key to solving the conflict. Vincent's arrogance was his blind spot. He thought she was a prize to be won. He didn't realize she was a queen who had just learned how to move her own pieces. As Ellen slammed the boat against the dock, she didn't wait for the engines to die. She leaped onto the slick wood, the flare gun gripped in her hand. She moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with the woman who had cowered at the altar weeks ago. She was a force of nature, driven by a love that had been forged in the crucible of betrayal. She found them near the edge of the helipad. Dominic was slumped against a crate, his white shirt now almost entirely crimson. Vincent stood over him, his face twisted in a sneer of pure ego, a pistol pressed to Dominic's temple. "You should have stayed in the water, Ellen." Vincent screamed over the wind. "Now you get to watch him die twice." "The only one dying tonight is the man who forgot who built this house," Ellen shouted back. But as she raised the flare gun, Vincent did something unexpected. He laughed. "You think you're the hero? Ask him, Ellen. Ask him about the Maroney debt. Ask him why Hannibal was really scared." Dominic looked up, his eyes glassy, his voice a mere thread of sound. "Ellen, don't listen." "The twist, Ellen," Vincent sneered, "is that Dominic didn't just watch you from afar. He was the one who bought your father's gambling debts years ago. He was the one who kept your family in his pocket so he could eventually save you. He didn't just wait for the world to break you, he bought the hammer." The world seemed to tilt. The final, most devastating secret was out. Dominic had been the silent hand behind her family's struggles for years, ensuring she would eventually have nowhere else to turn but him. It was a revelation that should have broken her. But Ellen didn't lower the flare gun. Instead she looked at Dominic. She saw the shame in his eyes, a shame more painful than his physical wounds. And then she looked at Vincent, who was reveling in the destruction of her trust. "You think that matters now?" Ellen's voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "Whatever he did to bring me here, he gave me the choice to leave on that cliff. And I chose him. You only offer a different cage." Before Vincent could pull his trigger, Ellen fired. The flare didn't hit Vincent. She aimed it at the massive fuel tank behind him. A tank she knew was there because she had studied the blueprints of the estate's emergency generators. The explosion was blinding. The shock wave threw Vincent backward, his gun skittering across the concrete. In the confusion, Clarice's lead helicopter leveled its Gatling gun. But it wasn't Clarice who took the shot. Ellen had dived for Vincent's dropped pistol. With the grace of a woman who had learned that peace was a lie, she fired 3 times. Each shot was a period at the end of a sentence. Vincent Vega Costello fell from the cliff, his body disappearing into the same churning Atlantic that had failed to claim Ellen. The Maroney soldiers, seeing their leader gone and the Corleone reinforcements arriving, threw down their weapons. The coup was over. Ellen ran to Dominic. She pulled his head into her lap, ignoring the blood staining her slip. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. "You don't get to leave after everything you did to get me here." Dominic let out a ragged, wet laugh, his hand reaching up to touch her cheek. I was going to tell you. I was going to make it right." "You already did," she said, kissing his forehead as Clarice and the medics swarmed the helipad. "You gave me the keys. Now I'm the one who decides who stays and who goes." The triumph was bitter, but it was absolute. Justice had been served in the dark, and the woman who had been a pawn was now the only one left standing on the board. Ellen Ripley Toretto stood on the balcony of the newly completed Corleone Cultural Center. It was a masterpiece of glass and light, a structure that felt as though it were breathing. It was the first building she had designed without fear, and it stood as a testament to the fact that something beautiful could indeed be built on a foundation of shadow. She was no longer the woman who had stumbled at the altar. Her movements were deliberate, her gaze sharp. She had taken the reins of the Corleone Foundation, turning its focus toward rebuilding the very neighborhoods her family's debts had once helped destabilize. She had found her permanence, but it wasn't in a building. It was in her own strength. The sound of a heavy door opening behind her didn't make her flinch. She knew the rhythm of those footsteps. Dominic walked out to join her. He leaned on a silver-headed cane, a permanent reminder of the price he had paid on the ledge, but his eyes were clear. The haunted, possessive hunger had been replaced by something deeper, something earned, respect. "The board meeting went well," he said, his voice a warm hum against the evening air. "They're terrified of you, you know. They call you the architect of the Iron Rose." Ellen smiled, a genuine, soft expression that she only reserved for him. "Good. Fear keeps them honest. But it's the work that keeps them loyal." She turned to him, the sunset casting a golden glow over both of them. The diamond collar was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant gold band on her finger, a ring she had chosen for herself. "I found the last of the records, Dominic," she said quietly. "The debts my father owed. I've settled them all. Every cent. I don't owe the past anything anymore. Dominic took her hand, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. And what about us? Are we a debt, Alan? Or a choice? Alan looked out over the city they now ruled together. She thought about the slap at the altar, the terror of the mansion, and the moment he had let her go on the cliffside. She realized that while their beginning had been a tragedy scripted by others, their middle and end were being written by them. We're a choice, Dominic, she whispered. Every single day. He pulled her into him, and this time the embrace wasn't a cage. It was a sanctuary. They had survived the fire, the betrayal, and the secrets, and they had emerged not just as partners in a dangerous world, but as two souls who had finally found home in the least likely of places. The blood wedding was a ghost of the past. In its place was a future built on truth, a legacy that would no longer be written in blood, but in the silk and steel of a woman who had learned that her heart was the only thing worth surrendering, and only to the man who was willing to lose everything to see her fly. As the lights of the city began to twinkle like a sea of stars, there was finally peace. Not the silence of a tomb, but the quiet, hopeful breath of a new beginning.